Lan, the young daughter-in-law, knelt before the altar, her face streaked with tears. On the altar was a photograph of Huang, her late husband, whose radiant smile was now only a painful memory. Her trembling hand reached out to touch the frame, her tear-filled eyes fixed on the familiar face she had once loved so deeply. "Father, I never thought it would end like this," she sobbed, her voice breaking with each word. Beside her stood Mr. Than, her father-in-law, his gaze heavy with sorrow. He too had lost his only son, the pride and joy of his life. Seeing Lan weeping before the altar pierced his heart even more deeply. When the guests had finally left, leaving the house cloaked in an oppressive silence, Mr. Than walked slowly to sit beside Lan. Gently placing a hand on her shoulder, he spoke in a hoarse voice. "Lan, my child, you're still young. Life is long ahead of you. I know you're in pain, but don't let yourself be consumed by it." Lan lifted her head, her red and swollen eyes meeting his. "Father, I don't know what to do anymore. I owe this family so much. Without Huang and you, I wouldn't have known what happiness was," she whispered, her voice trembling with guilt. Mr. Than sighed deeply. His weary eyes reflected a mixture of helplessness and a hidden, gnawing worry. He didn't want Lan, a young woman with so much life ahead of her, to spend her days trapped in grief and regret. But how could he ever fill the void that Huang had left in her heart? "All I want," he said slowly, his voice laden with sorrow, "is for you to find joy in life again. Don't let yourself drown in this pain." Lan lowered her head and tears spilled down her cheeks once more. Every corner of the house, every memory of Huang felt like a dagger twisting in her heart. That night, after Lan had retired to her room, Mr. Than sat alone in the dimly lit living room. The faint glow of the lamp illuminated his weathered face, etched with the lines of grief. He picked up Huang and Lan's wedding photo, staring at it for what felt like an eternity. A thought began to form in his mind, a difficult decision, one he knew would shock Lan. Yet, for the future of the family, he felt he had no choice but to consider it. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, scattering them across the yard like a forewarning of stormy days to come. A year passed since Huang's funeral. The spacious home, once filled with life, was now eerily quiet. The mornings were punctuated only by the sound of Lan's footsteps as she swept the yard and tended to the plants Huang had loved. She had retreated into a quiet existence, devoting herself to taking care of Mr. Than. It was her way of repaying the family that had once treated her like their own daughter. Yet, her heart remained heavy. A constant weight pressed upon her, her unfulfilled duty to give the family an heir. Occasionally, she would catch a fleeting glimpse of sadness in Mr. Than's eyes as he sat by the window staring into the distance. That look filled her with guilt. Though he never spoke of it, she knew the unspoken expectation lingered. For his part, Mr. Than silently observed Lan. She had grown thinner, her youthful vibrancy replaced by an aura of exhaustion and resignation. In his heart, he knew he had to do something to help her move forward, not just for her sake, but for the continuation of their family line. One evening, after a simple dinner, Mr. Than called Lan to sit with him. He lit a stick of incense on Huang's altar, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on his face, lined with age and sorrow. "Lan," he began, his voice low and steady, "I have something important to discuss with you." Lan looked at him, startled by the seriousness in his tone. "Yes, father? What is it?" she asked softly, her curiosity tinged with concern. For a moment, Mr. Than Luong Lu, Suingi Kwa Anta Ra Rang Jang Jiao Tran Ben Trong Anta. Finally he spoke, his words deliberate. "I have a request, something that may be difficult for you to accept, but I hope you'll hear me out." Lan frowned slightly, her expression cautious. "Please, tell me, father. I'll do my best to fulfill whatever you ask." Mr. Than raised his eyes to meet hers, his gaze unwavering yet filled with a deep, unspoken struggle. "Lon," he said carefully, "you're still young, and life is long. I know you've stayed here out of responsibility, out of love for this family, but I want you to think about your future." Lon's breath caught in her throat as she tried to anticipate where this conversation was headed. "If you agree, I want you to undergo artificial insemination to have a child." Lon froze. Her hand trembled slightly as she heard these words. "Dad, what do you mean?" she stammered, unable to believe her ears. Mr. Thon placed his hand on the table, his voice steady. "You don't have to remarry or face any public judgment. If you agree, I will take you to the hospital. We will proceed with artificial insemination using Huang's stored sperm." He sighed deeply before continuing. "I know this is hard to accept, but think about it. This is the only way to preserve our family and ensure there's someone to carry on the bloodline." Lon couldn't speak. Her face turned pale and her mind reeled. This proposal was both shocking and surreal. "Dad, I don't know what to say," she finally whispered, her head lowered as though the weight of the decision had crushed her heart. Mr. Thon sighed again, his voice softening. "I'm not forcing you, Lon, but I hope you'll think about it carefully. Hoang is gone, but I don't want this family line to end. If you refuse, I will understand and won't blame you." Lon left the dining table, retreating to her room in a haze of emotions. Mr. Thon's words echoed endlessly in her head. On one hand, she understood his reasoning. It was a legitimate wish, a duty to her late husband's family. But on the other hand, she felt cornered, forced into a moral and emotional crossroads she wasn't prepared to face. That night, Lon sat by the window, staring out at the dark courtyard. Her heart was a storm of conflicting emotions. Could she summon the courage to agree to such a request? The thought consumed her for days. She wrestled with her decision, questioning whether she should forge a new path, find another man, and rebuild her life, or remain tied to her late husband's family, fulfilling their expectations. The memories of Huang came flooding back. His laughter, his words, his presence, they haunted her, making it nearly impossible for her to let go. Finally, after nights of sleepless deliberation, Lon sat down with Mr. Than, her eyes filled with quiet determination. "Dad, I agree. I will do this for our family." Mr. Than let out a deep breath of relief, his eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Thank you, Lon. I know this isn't easy for you, but it means the world to our family." They decided to keep the matter private, not sharing it with anyone. Together, they quietly visited the hospital and began the process of artificial insemination. At first, everything went according to plan, but as Lan's belly began to grow, whispers started spreading throughout the village. The first to notice was Mrs. Hua, the notorious neighborhood gossip. One day, seeing Lan carrying groceries back from the market, Mrs. Hua couldn't resist approaching her. Her voice was low and conspiratorial, yet her curiosity shone through. "Lan, you've been looking so different lately. Why is your belly getting so big? Don't tell me. Are you pregnant? Who's the father of the baby?" Lan froze, struggling to maintain her composure. Forcing a smile, she replied, "Oh, I've just gained a little weight, Aunt Hoa. There's nothing to worry about." But Mrs. Hua wasn't so easily deterred. From that day on, she began to watch Lan and Mr. Than more closely, scrutinizing every move they made. The rumors began to snowball. Soon, scandalous whispers filled the air. "Did you hear? Lan and her father-in-law are up to something. Can you imagine? A daughter-in-law and her father-in-law having a child together? How disgraceful!" The gossip spread like wildfire. Within weeks, the entire village was abuzz with speculation. Lan felt the weight of judgment wherever she went. She could feel their disdainful stares cutting into her like knives. The children in the village started pointing fingers at her. "Mom, wasn't she Uncle Huang's wife? Why is she living like this with Grandpa Than now?" "Don't look at her, my dear," a mother would reply. "She's not someone you should learn from." Even those who used to be her closest friends began to distance themselves. Lan became the target of every cruel word, every judgmental glance. She locked herself in her room, tears streaming down her face. More than once she asked herself if she had made the right choice. Seeing Lan sink deeper into despair, Mr. Than couldn't bear it any longer. He sat beside her, placing his rough, calloused hand on her shoulder. His voice, though low, carried a steady resolve. "Lan, I know you're under tremendous pressure right now, but you need to believe that we're doing this not for ourselves, but for Huang, for the future of this family. What people say doesn't matter. We know the truth, and that's all that counts." Lan listened in silence. Her tears continued to fall, but she nodded faintly, drawing strength from his words. Weeks turned into months, and though the gossip didn't stop, Lan tried her best to stay strong. She focused on the life growing inside her, hoping that one day this child would bring healing to the wounds in their family. When the day finally came, and Lan gave birth to a healthy baby boy, a quiet joy filled the household. Mr. Than held the newborn in his arms, his eyes glistening with pride and hope. "Huang's spirit lives on in this child," he whispered. Lan, looking at her son, felt a mix of emotions: love, grief, and a flicker of peace. In that moment, she realized that though her journey had been fraught with pain, she had made her decision out of love and devotion to her family. The gossip in the village continued for a time, but gradually, as people saw the love and care Lan poured into raising her son, the rumors began to fade. Lan learned to hold her head high, knowing that she had done what she believed was right. In the end, it wasn't the opinions of others that defined her. It was the legacy she chose to preserve. The baby became a symbol of hope, a reminder of the past, and a promise for the future. And in the quiet of their home, Lan and Mr. Than found solace in the knowledge that, no matter how unconventional their path had been, they had honored Huang's memory and ensured the family line would endure. "Time will eventually silence all those who speak ill of you." Mr. Than's words were like a comforting balm that steadied Lan's spirit. She clasped his hand tightly and nodded. When Lan officially confirmed her pregnancy, the news spread rapidly, igniting even more gossip. Many people accused Lan of exploiting Mr. Than to secure a stable life. Some went as far as fabricating vile stories. "Why doesn't she just remarry? What's she still doing here? She's clearly after Mr. Than's property. A father-in-law and daughter-in-law doing something this disgraceful? Heaven won't forgive this." These harsh accusations didn't just wound Lan's heart, they also enraged Mr. Than. Determined to defend her, he spoke out, but his words did little to quell the wildfire of rumors spreading through the community. "We don't need to explain ourselves," Mr. Than told Lan. "Let them talk. The truth will shine on its own when the time comes." Lan nodded, but deep down, guilt consumed her. She blamed herself for dragging Mr. Than into this storm of controversy. Over time, Lan became more withdrawn. The sound of footsteps outside the gate or the murmurs of gossiping neighbors would send her retreating into a quiet corner of the house. One evening, as she sat in the dark, Mr. Than entered with a steaming bowl of tea. He placed it gently on the table and spoke softly. "Lan, you've sacrificed so much for this family. Don't let the words of others break you. We'll get through this together." Lan looked up at him, her eyes glistening with gratitude. Despite feeling abandoned by the world, she could still sense the love and protection of her father-in-law, a man she deeply respected. Just as Lan was weathering the storm of public judgment, a new challenge arose. Juke, a cousin of her late husband Huang, suddenly appeared at the house. His demeanor was arrogant, his tone audacious. "Uncle Than," Juke declared loudly, "I'm here to settle this once and for all. Huang is gone. The land and the family's assets should go to me. After all, I'm the only blood relative left." Mr. Than remained composed, meeting Juke's gaze calmly. "Juke," he said firmly, "these assets belong to Huang. You have no right to interfere in this matter." Juke smirked disdainfully. "Huang is gone. Don't think you can use an heir to keep the inheritance? What, are you going to let your daughter-in-law hold on to everything? And then what? Let something improper happen between you and her?" Lan froze in shock at Juke's words. He didn't hesitate to hurl baseless accusations. "Don't think I don't know what's going on between you and Lan," Juke continued. "The whole village is already talking about your so-called relationship. What you're doing isn't just disgraceful, it's a stain on the entire family's name." Mr. Than's face flushed with anger, but he remained calm and spoke with resolve. "Juke, your words are baseless. Don't accuse others out of greed." But Juke wasn't finished. He produced falsified documents and doctored photographs, intending to tarnish both Lan and Mr. Than. The situation became even more dire. Lan tried to stay calm, but when Juke began to attack the unborn child, she couldn't remain silent any longer. "Juke," Lan said firmly, her voice steady and resolute, "I don't want the property. I don't need anything from this family. Everything I've done has been for this family, for Huang, and for the future of this child. You have no right to insult my dignity or my father-in-law's." Her unwavering tone and determined gaze made Juke falter for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure and continued his tirade. Seeing Lan endure so much, Mr. Than decided it was time to reveal the truth he had kept hidden for so long. He looked directly at Juke, his voice low but filled with authority. "The child Lan is carrying is Huang's biological child." Juke froze, his expression one of utter disbelief. He turned to Mr. Than, his eyes demanding an explanation. Mr. Than began to recount the past. Years ago, Huang discovered he had health issues that might prevent him from having children. He was deeply worried about not having an heir, so he made a decision. At the hospital, the preservation of Huang's sperm became a way to ensure the family lineage wouldn't be interrupted. The child now, a result of artificial insemination, is undeniably Huang's son and the rightful heir to the family name. "There's nothing improper between Lan and me," Mr. Than firmly declared. He presented all the necessary hospital documents, including Huang's sperm storage record, the artificial insemination certificate, and the paternity confirmation for the child. These documents left no room for doubt, completely dispelling all accusations and suspicions. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Juke could no longer find words to defend himself. Lowering his head, he muttered, "I didn't expect this. Uncle, I was just trying to protect the family legacy." Mr. Than's tone turned stern. "Protecting the family isn't about spreading lies or wrongfully accusing others. If you continue down this path, don't expect me to tolerate such behavior, family or not." As the truth unfolded, the rumors in the village began to shift. Those who once criticized and belittled Lan now avoided her out of shame. Even Mrs. Hoa, who had been one of the loudest gossipers, came to Lan's house to apologize. "Lan, I was wrong. I didn't know the whole story. You truly are a good person who sacrificed so much for this family." Lan simply smiled, not holding a grudge. She knew the truth was enough to vindicate both herself and her unborn child. Under mounting pressure from the family and the community, Juke admitted his wrongdoing. He apologized to both Mr. Than and Lan, was reprimanded by the family, and left the village quietly. Finally, the storm had passed. Lan felt a deep sense of peace in her heart, knowing she had made the right choices and had Mr. Than's unwavering support through every hardship. The dark days began to fade as the cry of her newborn son echoed in the small home. Lan gave birth to a healthy, bright-eyed baby boy who resembled Huang in every way. The child became a beacon of hope, rekindling joy in a family that had endured profound loss and sorrow. For the first time, Mr. Than held his grandson in his arms, his face radiating happiness. "My grandson," he whispered, "you are the future, the hope of our family." Lan watched the scene, her heart swelling with gratitude and purpose. She no longer felt alone or burdened by the pain of the past. The house, once filled with silence, now overflowed with the laughter of a complete family. Though Huang was no longer with them, his love remained, binding them together. One evening, after putting the baby to sleep, Mr. Than Goi Lan Cho Mat Kwok Tro Chuyen Yen Tin. Gently, he said, "Lan, I've thought this through. I want to leave the family's assets to the baby. He's Huang's son, our heir, and I trust you to raise him well." Lan, taken aback, became emotional. "Father, I don't need the assets. All I want is to care for my son and repay you for everything." But Mr. Than shook his head. "Lan, this isn't just about money. It's my duty to secure the family's future. You deserve this for everything you've endured and for the sake of the child's future." From a once vulnerable young woman, Lan had transformed into a strong, resilient mother. No longer the timid daughter-in-law she used to be, she poured all her love into raising her son. Determined, she vowed to teach him to be kind, honorable, and to cherish the values of family. Watching Lan's unwavering strength, Mr. Than felt reassured. He realized that her sacrifices and unconditional love had broken through prejudices and created a stable, united family. He often sat with his grandson, telling him stories about his father, a man of integrity and deep responsibility. He also reminded Lan, "Life will always have its challenges, but as long as you stay true to your conscience and keep your faith, you'll find happiness." Lan nodded softly, understanding that all her efforts had not been in vain. The once quiet home now resounded with the laughter of a child, radiating happiness born from sacrifices and love. It was a fresh beginning for a family that had weathered life's storms together. And through the tireless efforts of Lan and Mr. Than, the neighbor, perspectives gradually began to shift. People couldn't help but admire Lan's strength, her selflessness, and the boundless love that Mr. Than showed for their family. The storms of life had passed, and now the entire family could finally enjoy true peace and happiness. Golden rays of the setting sun streamed through the rows of trees, casting a warm glow across the small courtyard in front of Mr. Than's house. Inside the cozy home, the laughter of children echoed like a joyful melody, sweeping away the sorrows of days gone by. Lan sat by the veranda, her gentle gaze fixed on her son, who was gleefully playing in Mr. Than's arms. The boy, with his bright eyes and endearing face, bore a striking resemblance to Huang. He had become the pride and boundless happiness of the whole family. Mr. Than lovingly cradled his grandson, gently rocking him as his eyes overflowed with affection. "My grandson is so clever," he said with a beaming smile. "When he grows up, I'm sure he'll become a good man who loves his family just like his father did." Lan responded softly, her voice filled with conviction. "Dad, I truly believe this boy won't let you or Huang down. I'll teach him to grow up with kindness, gratitude, and respect for life." The two exchanged a look, a shared moment of hope, their eyes reflecting a common faith in the brighter future that lay ahead. The story of Lan, the daughter-in-law, and Mr. Than, the father-in-law, delivered a profound message. Love has the power to overcome all prejudices and storms. Compassion and sacrifice form the foundation for building a meaningful life. True happiness isn't found in material wealth, but in the acts of sharing and understanding within a family. As the sun set, casting its warm glow over the small house, Mr. Than stood on the veranda, holding his grandson while gazing out at the sunlit courtyard. Lan stood beside him, her face glowing with a serene smile, her heart filled with faith in a brighter future. The final rays of the day bathed the little home in light, carrying a message of peace, hope, and new beginnings after life's storms. This story came to a close with a warm and meaningful ending. Lon and Mr. Thon had proven that love and kindness are the guiding lights that lead us to happiness and peace. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Ngon Jen's Story to discover more inspiring and heartfelt stories. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the video. We can't wait to see you again in future stories on Quantum Lessons.